Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your time and thank you to PMO Global Awards for inviting me to be part of this great global event. Unfortunately, I couldn't be with you today in person, but hopefully, even though I'm on the other side of the world, to many of you, you get as much inspiration and insight as you would had I been in the room on site with you all. I want to start by telling you a story about the bridge on the river Choluteca. It's a 484-meter long bridge over the river Choluteca in Honduras, Central America. It's a region that is notorious for storms and for hurricanes. When they decided to build the new bridge over the river Choluteca in 1996, they wanted to ensure that it would withstand the extreme weather conditions. So a Japanese firm was contracted and they built a solid bridge designed to withstand the powerful forces of nature. The new Choluteca Bridge was then opened to the public in 1998 and it was admired by everybody and the town's pride and joy. Unfortunately, in October that year, Hurricane Mitch hit Honduras. There were 75 inches of rain in 4 days. Now, to put that into context, that's normally 6 months' worth. The river swelled and flooded the region, with 7,000 lives lost. Every bridge in Honduras was destroyed except one. The Choluteca Bridge was unaffected. The problem was while the bridge was intact, all roads leading to and from it were swept away. The hurricane even caused the river to change course beside the bridge, not under it. It became a bridge over nothing and a bridge to nowhere. So why is this 22-year-old story relevant as ever? Because the world is changing. Our organizations are changing, technology is changing, the way we deliver is changing, the PMO is changing, and the pandemic has changed us. So we as PMOs need to adapt to change quickly or end up being obsolete. We should not spend all our time trying to solve a problem that we forget that the problem may well change. So we need to be built to adapt, not be built to last. I've been asked to speak to you all today because some incredibly gracious peers of mine decided that my ideas were worthy of voting for me. So thank you to everyone who voted for me, and also congratulations to Philippe and Peter who were also nominated in this category. Now, before I tell you more about my ideas, let me tell you a little bit about my journey so far. I wasn't successful in getting into university, so I went straight into the workforce and I started to learn on the job. Before I had turned 17, I had already worked 9 jobs, from selling cosmetics, event planning to a dance teacher. Since I was never taught how to learn, as most of us are not taught how to learn, I was forced to learn through experimentation and adapting to my environment. And it was 2003 when I fell into project management by accident, which I know many of you can probably relate to. From a very early age, I was always curious, a problem solver, and someone who naturally found ways to be resourceful. For me, I thought the faster I could do something well, the sooner I could learn something new. And so I've spent the last 17 years in corporate working across projects and programs all across the world for over 22 clients across 15 different industries. I started my first business in 2012 and then subsequently set up Agile Management Office, my current business, in 2016. As a result of some very successful programs that I led for a large bank that covered 13 countries in 2015, I decided that that approach that I was taking, which I'll share more about, was something that really warranted expansion and sharing that idea further. And that is why I developed the white paper in 2018. And then I took all of that information and knowledge and I partnered with a university in Denmark who had me speaking there several years prior. It was after that point at the white paper that I decided to research what are the challenges being faced, and I wanted to know whether the challenges I was seeing were similar to those around the world. So as a result of creating that white paper, I spoke to my peers globally, and I interviewed people across 7 countries and decided to write the white paper and highlight an approach about how approaching governance in a more of an agile way was necessary. And now with the rise of Agile, it's becoming even more important. Back to the PMO. There is a fundamental difference between thriving and surviving. Surviving means to continue to live or exist, while thrive can be defined as to grow or develop well, to prosper or to flourish. Now, whether you choose to survive or thrive is entirely up to you. So what are some of the signs that you're living in survival mode? Have a look at these and see if they are familiar to you. Look at the second last one. Are other people finding ways to go around you? That's project managers and other stakeholders. Remember that bridge where people now are finding ways to go around you? Unlike the bridge on the river Choluteca, I don't just want you to survive. Today I'm going to help you clearly demonstrate your value proposition so that you can not just survive, but also to thrive. We will do so by assessing how we are going in order to really consider how we can change. But first, it's important to understand what are the challenges that have been identified as a result of my recent 12-month research program, undertaken with professionals, executives, practitioners, and academics across 7 countries that helped lead to the global white paper. But before that, I want to tell you my definition of a thriving PMO. A thriving PMO is one that proactively demonstrates value and is consistently called on not just to solve problems, but deliver insights and guidance, and actively builds relationships, creating advocates as a result. Basically, everything done is with your customers' best interests in mind. Those customers can become your biggest supporters and advocate for you. Now let's go back in time and consider how we can change, but first understanding what it is and where it is that we have come from. Whether the PMO is providing value to an organization is largely dependent on who you speak to. There are several justifications for perceived value versus the actual value. The most common being that a typical PMO often lacks the authority and the autonomy required to effectively govern projects. A PMO is often seen as an unnecessary cost by today's executives, and as such, PMOs are put into a position where they must perpetually justify their existence. That is exactly what is happening to us right now with the rise of Agile. The purpose of my keynote today is to help you understand where we have come from, where we are today, and how to address some of our key challenges using Agile to drive a new league of support from our biggest advocates. Often we assume executives are on the same page. They usually aren't. They often aren't even reading from the same book. We often think that doing more of the same will yield the right results, but it seldom does. So let us go from transactional to transformational. And today we will learn about some of the ways we can not just survive, but to thrive. Let's reinvigorate our PMOs and be creative to work alongside delivery as a partner, not lag behind it. Now let's move back and look at the history. I believe that project management office is lagging behind delivery to the point that they're no longer as effective. This was the theme of my 2019 Global White Paper series. I found that the term project office dates back to the early 1800s, and it was used as a way to drive productivity to support a significant number of projects as a form of control. Whereas in the early 1930s, it was more about supporting projects. In the 1960s, we started seeing the rise of ePMOs to help align projects to organizational strategy. And as the concept of PMO grew, so did the need to provide standards or best practices. Since this occurred, the market has become saturated with literature about the function. As project delivery methods continue to evolve, they continue to be scrutinized, measured, assessed. Think about all the post-implementation reviews that take place every day around the world against projects. Yet over the last 100 years, when we look at PMO evolution against project management, you can see that as project delivery methods continue to evolve, the PMO tends to lag. The PMO is generally considered reactive, lagging behind project management evolution in many ways, all the way from innovation to PMO delivery models and techniques. And any signs of PMO evolution have been embedded or referenced within the project management practice. Now, I'd like to say that there are just as many flavors of ice cream as there are names for PMOs. Don't believe me? See, I told you. I've been involved or have led many of the following functions, and I can tell you that one thing is for sure. Like the Pareto principle, 80% of what we did was the same for majority of the functions. There was only really 20% that varied. So I asked this question: why, as PMOs, do we continue to debate the name and our role? With so many flavors of project management and project managers' different skills and experience, they just get on with it. Yet when it comes to PMO, we continuously are debating the name rather than just getting on with delivering value. It's no wonder that the PMO itself is becoming unmanageable. Is it any wonder that our stakeholders are confused? I like to think of it as PMO Jenga, taking existing elements, big and small, and continuously adding to the top. As the variations of PMO proliferated across the world, so too is the confusion and the challenges. So let's talk about challenges. Before we can start talking improvements, we need to understand some of the highest ranked challenges currently plaguing PMOs based on the research. So let's understand them more. And as we move forward, consider how many of these applied to your current or your previous situations, and see if you can spot these challenges within your organization, regardless of whether you are a PMO or another project management professional or an executive. Governing in agile ways is one of the key challenges that we've identified. And this is all about the growing need for organizations to improve overall agility and responsiveness to customer needs, leading to a mix of approaches in scaling agile. Going agile requires a degree of agile maturity and reasonable agile experience at the team level. A typical PMO's governance activities would focus on facilitation of processes, tools, ensuring documentation is being completed, contract requirements are being met, and ensuring that the plan has been followed, i.e. making sure that all things are on the right track. In a recent conversation with a client, we heard that they had discharged their PMOs as part of their agile journey, citing that they did this because there's no PMOs in agile, which is clearly not true. Now, adopting an agile delivery model is one thing, but to then drop the ball on good governance is completely another. Whilst the premise of a PMO may not be part of the original Agile manifesto, it certainly does not replace the need for good governance. The result of discharging their PMOs for this organisation has been an absolute eye-opener, as for them, they've lost the ability to govern their projects adequately. They've not only lost the oversight, but they've also lost the foresight. This has caused confusion, a lack of visibility, resource contention, duplication of effort, and severe impacts to their schedules. Delivery teams are now distracted as they are forced to pick up many of the traditional responsibilities of a PMO, such as management reporting, resource management, and even processing invoices. However, this is often disregarded and project managers become more and more overworked. That's right. So what is happening is PMOs are being discharged, being discharged, and the project managers are the ones who are suffering. A traditional PMO may not have a place in a traditional Agile delivery environment, but there's certainly need for structure, rigor, governance, and some support. Remember, Agile has been around for more than 20 years. It's not new. The reason it's becoming more of an issue for PMOs is the obvious disconnect between what the delivery teams need and what the PMOs are actually doing. An increase in new ways of working is leading to new ways of wasting. Some of our larger clients have admitted adding layers and layers of frameworks and governance on top of old, outdated governance and frameworks, and it's an ineffective approach, which is why it makes up one of our top 7 challenges. Organizational misalignment. Think about your PMO. Where does it sit? How many times have we seen the PMO location different dependent on the organization? Maybe you report to a CIO. Maybe you report to a program manager. Despite being called out as an issue in surveys globally, these surveys have not explored the reasons for the misalignment. Most surveys on PMOs call out misalignment to strategy as one of the top issues. Not sitting high enough can prevent the PMO from instigating strategic change or driving project alignment to strategic objectives. Many PMOs only provide governance after all the decision-making on the initiatives have been done, often missing an opportunity for validation of initiatives against strategy. And this is an important element of governance. I believe it's about bridging these gaps and looking at the picture of how your governance and your delivery fit together. I was presenting to a group recently and they had over 150 PMO resources in one company, and many of them were working in isolation of each other. Number 3 is stakeholder satisfaction. One of the many reasons for a PMO's establishment is to enhance the satisfaction of stakeholders. This is both up the line and down the line. However, we find that senior management are often significantly unsatisfied with projects after establishing PMOs. There is a lack of understanding inside and outside the PMO where agreement on how the PMO is run and what it delivers or who it is serving, be it the project managers or executives. Executives often request PMOs but do not support them or back them enough. And number 3, alternative concepts to their PMO are happening because of trauma from unsuccessful attempts in the past, where executives have maybe experienced an unhelpful or ineffective PMO. When undertaking the interviews globally, some of our interviewees admitted that their organizations have created pseudo-PMO functions, that is, functions that act, smell, and look like a PMO, just to get around ineffective ones they had within their organization. Number 4 is delivery disconnect. Project managers and delivery teams do not understand the requirement for additional paperwork, arguing that it stifles creativity. PMOs are often seen as the process police, only doing things to appease up-the-line stakeholders rather than support it with core functions that enable a project to be successful. There is often an assumption that when projects are going wrong, that it needs more governance, more reporting, and more layers of bureaucracy. In many organizations, varying methods, practices, tools, and systems are often not integrated across their PMOs. For example, one client that we worked with last year was running projects and had PMOs both in their IT department and then in the group corporate project space. This is a medium-sized company and they were having PMOs run completely in isolation of each other, completely different, basically against each other, which was completely ineffective and caused a lot of frustration, duplication, and rework. Challenge number 5 is around lack of efficiency. The outdated PMO is typically established to align to an organization's delivery methodology. Often, that is waterfall in nature. This assumes that every activity is sequential. The rigidity of the traditional governance waterfall approach inhibits adaptability and flexibility. And PMOs themselves are also working in isolation from one another, meaning more opportunities for inefficiency. They've got limited external support, which inhibits their ability to grow and evolve. And inefficient PMOs means non-PMO teams are absorbing the effort as a result. Remember I was talking about the project managers picking up the slack? Despite establishing enterprise PMOs, which is supposed to be the parent of all PMOs within an organization, many times I've seen that they're just there to serve the executives. So they focus on high-level policy setting, organizational reporting and metrics, etc. Furthermore, the focus is usually limited to the highest priority projects where the rest fly undetected. For example, every time there is a resource change within the PMO, there is a complete reset of processes with little consideration given to the flow-on effect for delivery teams. It means many of the same processes are being repeatedly redeveloped. They are not mature, optimized, and therefore carrying a lot of waste. For example, one client we were working at, establishing a departmental PMO for them, and then right across the hallway, popping up like a meerkat, was a new PMO. Setting up their own processes, setting up their own tools, and setting up their own techniques. Challenge number 6 relates to lack of training, another prominent one that appears in many global PMO surveys. So I asked this question: does a lack of training contribute to negative perceptions of the PMO? I think it does. Internal knowledge and learnings are not being harnessed, particularly when organizational PMOs are working against each other. Existing training that does become available internally is often developed with delivery, project management in mind. Often PMOs are not given any budget for training, and organizations then have to rely on external resources to bring in that capability, rather than uplifting the capability of their existing teams. The education for the PMO market needs to mature and more focus on the practicalities and the levels of complexity facing the PMO, and less about the definition, needs to happen. Now, although it is improving slowly, particularly over the last few years, PMOs need to learn how to be agile in terms of agility, and there is not much that is teaching that today. Number 7, the value proposition. If I ask your teams, would they be able to tell me, that is your stakeholders, if I were to come and ask your stakeholders, would they be able to tell me what your value proposition is? If you ask your stakeholders and they can't tell you what your value proposition is, then that means it hasn't been clearly defined for enough impact. Despite best intentions, a PMO is the first to go when cost cutting becomes a priority. This sentiment was agreed by 85% of our survey respondents in 2018. In a KPMG New Zealand project management survey of 2017, they identified that a struggle exists to define the PMO role and to position the PMO for long-term success, and to leverage the PMO to support the organisation in achieving its objectives. I think PMOs struggle to demonstrate their value for several reasons. One of them, lack of strategic backing to influence and significantly improve project outcomes. Often any authority or autonomy is often also overruled. There is often a perception that PMOs are impeding delivery rather than supporting it. There is a lack of definition and clarity of the PMO's role within an organisation. PMOs are often filling gaps in tools and processes as opposed to being responsible for their own transformation. Unless we significantly turn the dial, demonstrating how delivery can be more successful as a result of PMO intervention and involvement, then we will face continued challenges. And unlike project management, will need to fight for survival instead of fighting to improve project delivery outcomes. Now let's talk about Agile. Despite being something that has been around for more than 20 years, and I've been saying for the last 5 years that despite Agile delivery becoming the preferred delivery approach of many organizations, that foresight and oversight is still necessary. Let's discuss what Agile really means. Now, when I talk about Agile, there are many differences between being Agile, doing Agile, and applying Agile. One of those ways is Big A Agile, and that is focusing on business agility. That is organizational change. That is the techniques, the tools, the principles, the methods, all of the things that you can learn, experience, and apply when going Agile. Though small A Agile is equally important, and smart organizations do understand this. I believe that small A Agile is just as important as big A Agile. And so you need to make sure that you are allowing for both of these. You can't have one without the other and be effective. So how is Agile being applied today? I really think that for PMOs to really understand how they can evolve and they can thrive using Agile, that we need to understand how it is being applied today. Let's go through a few examples. When we think about company-wide Agile transformations, that is typically a top-down approach. Barclays Bank in the UK comes to mind. They have applied a company-wide and an organizational change to Agile management that starts right at the top and basically goes all the way down. So they're basically doing a top-down approach. Then when we think about Agile being applied across multiple departments, well, this example here relates to several of the big four banks in Australia, where they've led an Agile transformation agenda, but it's being led by a few executives and it's happened at a department or a divisional level. For example, this might be happening in the Australian division, for example, or it might be happening within the IT division. But multi-department means it's not end-to-end company-wide like Barclays was, but rather across multiple departments. Then we think about single department Agile applications. This is where we look at Agile starting to appear in pockets. For example, in one organization, we've seen Agile proliferating out of IT because they've started focusing on Agile in their build and test areas. Within the projects and teams, they focused on Agile in that particular department as opposed to across the rest of the organization. And then when we think about teams, sub-functions, and individuals, this is where there may be a few Agile enthusiasts, not management typically, and are then applying Agile themselves. So here you might see things like Confluence come through. Here you might see some people doing the Agile training. Here you might see sort of incremental elements of Agile. You might see Kanban walls, for example, or Kanban walls rather. Either way, this is more of a bottom-up approach to Agile. And I think that's really important to have a view of that as a PMO so we can understand how our organization is applying that. And then we think about PMO. Let's think about some of the traditional elements relating to PMO and then compare them to more agile elements of PMO. This is where we need to think about creating greater transparency for our customers, being flexible rather than rigid. Even if you have a framework or you have a specific approach that needs to be followed for something, take the time to consider whether that could be flexible to adapt to the different needs of your project management community. It's about being adaptable. Being proactive means being ahead of the curve and mitigating risks and identifying risks in order to mitigate them. It's about flat structure. So rather than being hierarchical and focusing on the preferences of one PMO manager or the person in charge, Think about it as a team sport where everybody is equal to each other. Yes, you may have someone that needs to lead the charge, but you're working together collaboratively, which brings me to the next point. Collaborative means working with your stakeholders to identify the needs of certain processes and understanding how to apply them. Forget about documents, focus on value. Does that mean you won't have any documentation? No, but it means it needs to be assessed regularly so that it is providing value for your stakeholders. Remember, we need to be transparent, not ambiguous. So what does bringing Agile and traditional governance together look like? Well, let's look at an example. In 2014, I was engaged to set up a global PMO that spanned 13 countries for a Big Four bank to support an enterprise-wide program. As I began the process, I found that the existing governance practices for this Big Four bank here in Australia were inefficient to support what was needed to be successful, as the complexity of the program was significantly high and at the time a direct request from the CEO. For example, we're talking about cross-divisional funding, external funding injection, another rare one, complex legal structures, different accounting rules across the regions, different general ledger systems, different cost centers, different purchasing teams, different HR departments, different team members in different locations with different maturity. There were significant levels of stage gating. There were a lot of systems impacted. We had schedules across different countries and regions. They were running Agile, they were running a hybrid, and they were running waterfall, traditional PMBOK. There was a lot going on. And I knew that the governance framework for this PMO had to be unique for the situation that I was in. I had developed one after significant consultation globally, and developing one that was then later signed up by the COO. It was a new function, a new team, it was a new everything. Effectively, we were covering so many complexities and so many different things at any point in time. It was very, very challenging. Now, if I had set up a framework at the beginning that was rigid and then requested that everybody apply it, it would not have worked. I needed to make sure that I consulted with all of the regions to take their perspectives on board. Does that mean we needed to take everything everyone said and apply it? No. But did it mean that as we progress further into the 3-year program, when we realized, for example, that their stage gates that originally were to be followed at a group level were not sufficient, we had to create new ones. But if we had asked every region to follow one country's stage gate process, there would have been uproar. And so we needed to make sure that we applied stage gates in a way that was flexible and also transparent. When we think about investment, we're talking about funding coming in from multiple different sources. And there was investment committees in Asia, in Pacific, in Australia, and in New Zealand. So we had to make sure that we met deadlines, we met reporting requirements, and we made sure that we were providing the right information at the right time. When we're talking about stakeholders, we had over 250 stakeholders, and we had 100 people globally dispersed on this program. When we look at reporting, there were 23 monthly reports. And to put that into context, originally we started with over 40, and we were able to reduce that down to 23. And as a result of experimentation, using some Agile principles, and putting together a report, more of a live reporting approach, it enabled us to simplify the content coming in from all of the different countries and regions into 5 reports that then were able to be distributed across the 23 required. We had 17 cost centers and BSBs and codes and all these sorts of things. So it was a quite complex piece of work, but it ended up being the most successful program based on the post-implementation review. And it was because we consulted and we worked extremely closely with all of the different teams and regions. And we made sure that what we developed was efficient specifically. It wasn't built to last, it was built to adapt, and adapt is exactly what we did. That executive manager at the time was so impressed with the work that was done at this major bank that she ended up bringing us on that journey at another bank. And then she took us forward to Australia's second largest supermarket, where we then helped to implement further value. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Since then, she's also engaged us for another major bank. Now, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is we've built an advocate. You build an advocate by demonstrating the value. This executive manager was not involved in the day-to-day of the PMO, but we were able to demonstrate the value in a way that made sense for her. So understand the executive's learning style and the way that they best perceive the value that you're providing and help them to understand that. I want to tell you about another example. As a result of the success in the banking and finance space, I wanted to know how approaching governance in an agile way in other industries would work, and if it would drive the same results even though the situation was different. So I decided to establish a research project to test the impacts of applying the Agile Management Office method at Australia's second largest supermarket. But first, we had to understand the starting position. So we took baseline measures from a number of different areas, including NPS customer scores and employee engagement scores. We took reference of current state, target state, time frame, metrics, data points. Then we used the AMO method, and then we established the baseline. And we proceeded to help them to uplift capability, create a framework for change, embed that, and help them to continuously improve. We used an action research cycle, which is a research technique that was shared to us by our university counterparts. In this organisation, the PMO activities started and it stopped with the executives. One of the strategic drivers was to increase employee engagement scores. We had to agree what we would stop, what we would start, what we'd do more of, and what we would do less of. We tied accountability at all three levels of this department. And everything we did was integrated from people, information, governance, and delivery of the change. As a result, we increased employee engagement by 15%. We increased maturity levels by 2, from a CMMI level 1 closer to a CMMI level 3. And we were scored a 9 out of 10 for effectiveness. So how do you use Agile to your advantage? To truly be able to transform, I believe PMOs need to be chameleons and introduce the right tools, processes, capabilities, and mindset that is right for the environments they are in to be successful. If I tried to apply exactly the same approach at the bank that I did within the supermarket, I would not have gotten the same outcome. I needed to tailor it and adapt it to the situation at hand. We also assume sometimes that one way is the right way. Yet despite overwhelming evidence, it's clear that for the PMO to be successful, it needs to be a chameleon to its environment, fitting in with the changing environment around them, be it with tools, techniques, technology. We can do this by using Agile principles to address the challenges that we talked about earlier. So we talked about governing in Agile ways as one of the challenges. There's not one company that I've worked with, and there have been more than 20 or 25 to date, that has been completely Agile. Instead, each of them had always had a hybrid model, mixing ways of working to meet their environment. Unless, of course, they're focused completely on traditional waterfall. I believe every PMO should be Agile in terms of agility to keep up with delivery, but don't run your PMO based on a delivery methodology. Delivery methods are for delivery, not for PMOs. So I recommend understanding your current governance landscape. One government department that we were working with had 36 different touch points. How much do you have? We need to consider the spaces people need to work in, like visual persistence, continuous learning, quick experimentation opportunities. We need to make sure we have digital and analog streams of information and in-person and virtual meetings, obviously pandemic permitting. We need to make sure that the PMO can continue to perform some of the traditional activities that have not changed in many companies, like investment funding or program oversight and reporting, but then do some of those in an agile manner. For example, key agile mechanisms that can be used to perform these functions might include lightweight business cases, agile estimating and planning techniques, decentralized decision making, and objective fact-based measures and milestones. When thinking about organizational misalignment, find an executive who will empower you to make positive change, like the one that I found. Understand your organization's strategy and make sure that you are aligned to it. Try to engage yourself from idea rather than after the planning is done. Every function that I've worked in, particularly over the last 10 years, I've always made sure to get involved from the idea stage. Getting involved from the beginning helps you to trace initiatives back to strategy. Understand the governance landscape and select governance methods, tools, and templates that are relevant, not just mandated. And then also make sure that you are leveraging organizational-wide knowledge to your advantage. And you can do that in various ways. Mentoring and coaching, feedback loops, or even bringing all your PMOs together. When thinking about stakeholder awareness, and particularly during this pandemic, my focus would be entirely on rebuilding culture and stability for my stakeholders. People have been through enough, and so there may not be any appetite for change right now. But what we can do is ask our stakeholders and seek feedback from them. Create transparent ways for them to see the progress of their feedback, and then help to drive awareness by creating a way for them to not only share their ideas and insights, but also their challenges and their hurdles. As I said, right now, it's key to provide that stability and reliability because people are going through a lot with this global pandemic. When it comes to delivery disconnect, be agnostic of delivery. I know that sounds really hard or really challenging, that we're supporting delivery, but we have to be agnostic. Well, that's because delivery methods and processes changed with the project managers that are coming in to deliver them a lot of the time. But PMOs need to focus on making sure that their governance is just not following a straight line. There's many assumptions that governance itself is waterfall in nature, but it's not always. So PMOs don't need to follow project methodologies. They need to create their own that is agnostic of what's going on around them. To see things from the project manager's perspective, I recommend being part of a project. That'll help you refocus and redesign what it is that is necessary. Regularly reviewing each part of your function will ensure that it is relevant moving forward. And then measuring your progress. Exceed your stakeholder feedback and expectations with regular, intermittent feedback loops. Build relationships across the enterprise, and that will help you to move forward and create advocates for your PMO so that it can thrive. Lack of efficiency. So your work should benefit the masses and not be just about you as the PMO leader, but always about your customers. So really stop. Stop and assess everything that you are doing today. Review every process, understand its current state, identify where it starts and ends, review of who it benefits, understand the touch points, understand the inputs and the outputs. Ask yourself, does this process solely fit within your project, program, or portfolio? Or maybe it's something that aligns to organizational policies and procedures. And develop a people, tools, process, and capability inventory to make sure that you are remaining efficient. Lack of training. According to a PMI study, they call the top skills that are being sought as Agile, Lean, Digital, and Innovation. For PMO, I believe they are innovative mindset, agility and adaptability, digital delivery, collaboration and communication, data knowledge and management. I think the PMO training market, as I mentioned earlier, needs to mature, and we need to focus on the practicalities. For now, as a professional, I recommend using the 70-20-10 rule. That is 70% of your time is experimental learning by embracing new and challenging experiences on the job. 20% of formal learning through courses, classes, training programs, and events like this. And 10% of social learning through communities, networks, coaching, mentoring, or meetups, for example. Knowing all of this, it'll help us to uplift our capabilities. Value proposition. Good PMOs are not lucky. They're proactive and purposefully co-designing beautiful solutions. So don't set up a PMO until you've understood its purpose and you documented it and you've socialized it. Don't establish processes without consulting your customers, and make sure that you invite your customers to go with you and co-design solutions that actually work. Remember, people aren't mind readers. They are often too busy. So if you don't proactively demonstrate your value, then you will be lost and you will be forgotten. You may just be surviving. And make sure that you also identify the value that you add and test and measure it. To be truly able to transform, PMOs need to be chameleons, as I mentioned before. We also need to think about governance and Agile, that it's about putting Agile in governance, not governance into Agile. I want you to think about these 5 questions as a key takeaway of today's session. I want you to think about what old processes don't offer you actionable insights right now that are going to help you improve your PMO and its service offering. If you've got processes for process sake, you need to really assess how much time they're taking and whether or not they're going to be able to add any value. And if you're not able to have actionable insights as a result, then maybe it's time for that process to go. Which takes me to my next point. What should you start doing, stop doing, do more, and do less of? Something I learned from entrepreneur Steve Glaveski. Number 3, how can you get twice the results with half the effort? Through efficiency gains. Think about that. Number 4, what capabilities are holding you back? And if you're part of a bigger PMO, what capabilities are holding your PMO back? What capabilities are you missing? And what capabilities do you need to bring in? And number 5, what are the smallest steps that you can take now to increase your PMO fitness so that you can be more agile? Now, we need to understand what our challenges are and where we are today. We need to be fit. We need to embrace agility in a way that helps us to experiment, and we need to listen and learn from our stakeholders. One of the most important metrics is and will always be stakeholder satisfaction. And the pandemic just amplifies this because of the challenging time that everyone is faced with. There are things we need to focus on now, like culture, engagement, responsiveness, and satisfaction. The PMO focus is now more than ever on providing stability and reliability. And the way to measure this is through conversations with our stakeholders. So let us not fear failure, let us disrupt and drive value. And remember, use Agile responsibly. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciated your time and your attention. And I hope that you've found some inspiration. For more inspiration, you can go to any of the links on your screen. You can join my free meetup and get more insights, learnings, and also opportunities to break down the capabilities and learn more about those. You can listen to the Agile Ideas podcast. You can download the white paper on your screen. And also, I have some upcoming workshops that I welcome you to be part of. Again, follow the link on your screen. I've been Fatima. I hope you have an amazing rest of conference. Thank you so much.